Welcome back to The Faithful Citizen. As we continue our series on redeeming the fallout of the culture war, we've already looked at how the gospel redeems manhood, womanhood, and the family from worldly stereotypes. But today, we're stepping into the most volatile territory of all. Usually, we feel forced to choose between two trenches. On the one side, we have the revolution, which tells us that our desires define our identity and that consent is the only standard. On the other side, we have the rules, a reaction that often treats sex as a dangerous explosive to be managed by fear and shame. Both sides agree on one lie, that sex is the most important thing about you. Today, we're asking, what happens when we smash both idols and finally see sex not as a god or a demon, but as an icon pointing to a greater mystery? Let's take a closer look.
Yeah. Welcome to the space where conviction meets rhythm, where truth got a mic and the church gotta listen. This ain't Sunday talk, it's real life living. Faith in motion, the citizen's mission. We talk grace, we talk justice, we talk peace. Not the kind that conforms, but the kind that frees. The world's loud with noise, we cut through the vision. This is the faithful citizen, let's get to the wisdom.
If you were to judge our culture solely by its billboards, its Netflix algorithms, and its lyrical obsessions, you'd conclude that we're the most sexually fulfilled generation in human history. We've thrown off the shackles of traditionalism. We've rewritten the scripts of gender and desire. We've made sexual expression synonymous with human flourishing, declaring that to be truly alive is to be sexually uninhibited. The sexual revolution won. The flags are planted, the victory parades are over, and yet, if you look past the billboards and into the actual lives of modern people, you find a starkly different reality. We're not the most fulfilled generation, we're the most exhausted. Sociologists are now tracking a historic sex recession, with young adults having less sex, forming fewer relationships, and reporting higher levels of loneliness and anxiety than any generation before them. We were promised a banquet of freedom, but we seem to be starving at the table. This is the great paradox of our time. We're obsessed with sex, yet we're terrified of intimacy. We're drowning in pornography, yet we're drifting apart from one another. As Christians, it's tempting to look at this wreckage and simply retreat to the good old days. It's tempting to double down on the rules, the boundaries, and the purity narratives that defined the evangelical subculture of the 90s and 2000s. But if we're honest, that strategy has failed us too. For many who grew up in that era, sex wasn't presented as a holy mystery, but as a dangerous explosive, something to be feared, managed, or traded like a commodity in exchange for a blessed marriage. The culture war forces us to choose between these two trenches. On one side is license, the belief that your desires are your identity, and to deny them is to deny your very self. On the other side is legalism, the belief that your desires are your enemy, and that suppressing them is the only way to be holy. But here's the uncomfortable truth. Both sides are idolatrous. Both the revolution and the rules agree on one fundamental lie, that sex is the most important thing about you. The secular world worships sex as a god of identity. The religious world fears sex as a demon of destruction. Both make it the center of the universe. But the gospel offers a different story. It suggests that sex is neither a god nor a demon. It's an icon. In the Orthodox tradition, an icon isn't the thing itself, it's a window. You don't worship the icon of Christ, you look through it to see the Savior. Similarly, sex was designed by God not to be a destination but a signpost. It's a temporary, earthly picture of a greater eternal reality, the union of Christ and His church. The tragedy of our culture, and often our churches, isn't that we value sex too much. It's that we value it too little. We've taken a sacred signpost and tried to make it a home. We've smashed the icon, and now we're cutting ourselves on the shards, trying desperately to find meaning in the fragments. Today's episode, The Broken Icon, is an attempt to put the pieces back together. To do that, we have to walk through the wreckage of the revolution and the ruins of purity culture, so we can finally see what this gift was pointing to all along. To understand why the modern landscape of sexuality feels so fractured, we have to look at the foundation upon which it's built. The sexual revolution was never just about who we sleep with. It was about who we are. It was a theological coup that replaced the creator with the self. The central dogma of our age is expressive individualism. This is the belief that the most genuine part of you is your inner world of desires and feelings, and the highest purpose of life is to express those feelings outwardly. In this worldview, any constraint on your sexual expression, whether from society, family, or religion, isn't just an inconvenience. It's an act of violence against your very humanity. The revolution taught us a new catechism. I am my desires. Historically, Christians and most cultures viewed sexual desire as something you have, like hunger, energy, or anger. It was a powerful force that needed to be stewarded, directed, and sometimes denied for the sake of a higher good. But the revolution collapsed the distance between the person and the impulse. Now, to say no to a sexual desire is to say no to the person themselves. This makes rational conversation about sexual ethics nearly impossible. When sex is elevated to the level of identity, a disagreement about behavior is perceived as a denial of existence. If I'm my sex life, then you can't love me if you don't celebrate who I sleep with. This is the crushing burden of the idol of identity. It demands total affirmation, yet it leaves us perpetually insecure, because our sense of self is tied to something as fluid and fickle as our appetites. Because the revolution dismantled the old moral structures, it had to build a new one. If there's no God to define what's right and no nature to determine what's normal, what's left? The answer is consent. Let's be clear, consent is vital. In a world rife with abuse and coercion, the enthusiastic yes of two parties is a necessary legal and interpersonal floor. But for the Christian, consent is a terrifyingly low moral ceiling. The idol of the revolution claims that as long as two adults consent, the act is good. But this reduces sex to a mere transaction. It views the human body as property, a piece of real estate that the self owns and leases out to others for mutual benefit. This is a contractual view of intimacy, not a covenantal one. Consent can tell you if an act is legal, but it can't tell you if it's holy. Two people can consent to use one another. Two people can consent to an act that degrades their dignity. Two people can consent to a relationship that isolates them from community. When consent becomes the only God in the room, sex is stripped of its mystery and reduced to a negotiation of appetites. So, what has this freedom bought us? If the revolution was supposed to usher in a utopia of pleasure and connection, why does the data suggest the opposite? We're currently living through what sociologists call the sex recession. Despite the ubiquity of dating apps and the normalization of hookup culture, young adults are having less sex than previous generations. Depression and anxiety among young people, particularly young women, have skyrocketed in tandem with the rise of the hookup. This is the inevitable fruit of the revolution. When sex is severed from covenant, commitment, and the sacred, it becomes exhausting. It becomes a performance. It becomes a high-stakes audition for validation. We've traded the safety of I do for the anxiety of you up. The idol of the revolution promised that if we just followed our desires, we'd be happy. Instead, it's left a generation catechized by pornography, paralyzed by options, and starving for the kind of deep, frightening vulnerability that can only be found when you promise not to leave in the morning. If the secular world is suffering from the exhaustion of license, the church is often reeling from the trauma of legalism. For many Christians who came of age in the 90s and early 2000s, the dominant narrative around sexuality wasn't the icon, but the rule book. We were raised in purity culture, a movement born out of a sincere desire to protect, but one that ultimately operated on fear rather than faith. This movement created its own idols, and like all idols, they demanded sacrifices. To redeem sex, we must dismantle the three great lies of the rules. The first lie was a metaphor. You remember it. You were the piece of tape that had been stuck to too many surfaces and lost its stickiness. You were the piece of chewing gum passed around a classroom. You were the rose with its petals plucked off. These object lessons were designed to terrify young people into abstinence, but they taught a devastating theological error: that your value as a human being is located in your sexual history. This narrative taught a generation of men and women that they were damaged goods if they had a past, whether by choice or, tragically, by force. It suggested that purity was a physical state of the hymen rather than a spiritual posture of the heart. It created a culture of profound shame, where Jesus' power to make all things new apparently applied to everything except your virginity. It goes without saying, but we must say it clearly. You're not chewing gum. You're not tape. You're a temple of the Holy Spirit. There's no sexual history that places you outside the reach of redemption, and there is no purity that makes you more lovable to God than you already are in Christ. If purity culture shamed single women, a distorted biblical marriage culture often crushed married ones. This brings us to one of the most destructive idols in the Christian home, the weaponization of 1 Corinthians 7. In this passage, Paul writes that husbands and wives shouldn't deprive one another. Historically, this text has been twisted to strip wives of their agency, turning sex from a gift, which is voluntary, into a debt, which is demanded. How many Christian wives have been told that they don't have the right to say no? How many have submitted to their husbands with tears in their eyes, believing they were obeying God by ignoring their own bodies? This isn't just bad marriage advice, it's theological heresy. Marriage is the icon of Christ in the church. Does Christ ever force himself upon his bride? Does he coerce her intimacy? Does he demand access to her heart when she's weary, broken, or unwilling? Never. Jesus waits. He woos. He lays down his life. Therefore, a husband who demands sex based on his rights isn't acting like Christ. He's acting like a conqueror. Coerced sex, even within marriage, destroys the icon. It turns the wedding bed into a site of taking rather than giving. The Christian sexual ethic is mutuality, not entitlement. Finally, there's the prosperity gospel of sex. This was the unspoken contract of purity culture. If you follow the rules, if you don't have sex before marriage, if you dress modestly, if you attend the purity balls, then God will reward you with a hot spouse and a mind-blowing sex life. We treated holiness like a coin in a vending machine. But then the wedding night came, and for many the magic didn't happen. Instead, there was pain, there was awkwardness, there was the trauma of vaginismus, the confusion of erectile dysfunction, or the crushing disappointment of mismatched libidos. Couples felt betrayed. They thought, I did my part, God. Where's my prize? This transactional view sets us up for bitterness because it treats sex as a commodity we earn rather than a discipline we learn. It ignores the reality that we're broken people living in broken bodies. The rules can't save us from the fall. We've smashed the idol of the revolution, and we've smashed the idol of the rules. Both have left us empty. So, what's left? If we strip away the idolatry of the revolution and the trauma of the rules, we're left with a sincere question. What's this for? Why did God design a universe where human beings reproduce through this specific, intense, vulnerable, and often complicated act? The world tells us sex is for pleasure. Evolution tells us it's for propagation. Purity culture tells us it's a test of obedience. But the gospel tells us something far more radical. The gospel tells us that sex is a prophecy. In Ephesians 5, the Apostle Paul drops a theological bombshell. After quoting Genesis regarding the one flesh union of husband and wife, he writes, "This mystery is profound, and I am saying that it refers to Christ and the church. Don't miss the magnitude of this claim. Paul is arguing that God didn't create sex and marriage first and then use them as a convenient metaphor for his love. He's saying that the union of Christ and his people was the blueprint, and human sexuality was created as the illustration. This is the theology of the icon. An icon is a window. It's beautiful in its own right, but its purpose is to draw your eye through it to the reality it represents. Sex is the earthly icon of the cosmic reality. The desire of God to be united with his people. The nakedness, the vulnerability, the intensity, the knowing and being known. It's all a physical shadow of a spiritual substance. This theology changes everything. It means that sex isn't the closest we get to heaven, as the Romantics claim. It's merely the signpost pointing us toward heaven. C.S. Lewis once famously argued that our earthly pleasures are merely appetizers or rays of the sun. The mistake we make is trying to eat the sunbeam rather than following it back to the sun. When we understand sex as a signpost, we're finally free from the pressure to make it our god. The idol of the revolution collapses under this weight because it tries to make the signpost the destination. It demands that a physical act bear the weight of ultimate meaning. And when the dopamine fades, we're left empty. The idol of the rules collapses because it treats the signpost as a landmine. You can't rejoice in a signpost if you're terrified it'll blow up in your face. Paradoxically, having a high theological view of sex allows us to have a more relaxed, human view of the act itself. If sex is the ultimate source of your identity, the revolution, then every sexual encounter must be earth-shattering. It must be a performance. It must be perfect. This creates immense anxiety in the bedroom, what we might call the tyranny of the orgasm. But if sex is an icon, a simple reminder of God's love, then it doesn't have to be a fireworks show every time. It can be awkward, it can be funny, it can be quiet. It can be a comfort rather than a crescendo. By elevating the meaning of sex, we lower the stakes of the act. We free married couples to simply be with one another, without the crushing burden of performing a scene from a movie. Finally, this theology redeems the body itself. Against the revolution which treats the body as a playground, the icon says the body is a temple, a sacred space where heaven and earth meet. Against Gnosticism and some strains of purity culture, which treats the body as a prison or a source of sin, the icon says the body is good. God created bodies. He took on a body in the incarnation. He's resurrecting our bodies in the end. Therefore, what we do with our bodies matters. Holiness isn't about denying our bodies. It's about aligning them with their true purpose, to tell the truth about God's love. If sex is the icon of the gospel, a physical picture of Christ's self-giving love for his church, then we must identify the counterforce that's currently discipling our culture. If sex is the icon, pornography is the anti-icon. We often treat pornography as a bad habit, a moral failure, or a struggle to be managed. But it's far more dangerous than that. It's a rival liturgy. It's a system of worship that teaches our hearts a theology of the self. Consider the central act of Christian worship, the Eucharist. In communion, Jesus presents his body to us and says, "This is my body, broken for you." It's an act of total self-giving. It's a covenant where the greater serves the lesser. Pornography preaches the exact opposite gospel. Its liturgy says, "This is your body taken for me." Where the gospel is about covenant, pornography is about consumption. It trains us to view the human body not as a temple to be honored, but as a resource to be mined. It strips the other of their personhood, their story, and their soul, reducing them to a collection of body parts existing solely for our gratification. This is why pornography is so spiritually devastating. It's not just lust. It's a catechism of control. It teaches us that we can have intimacy without risk, pleasure without service, and connection without vulnerability. It promises us that we can be the gods of our own sexual universe, where every desire is met and no demand is ever made of us. The idol of the revolution told us that more sexual freedom would lead to better sex, but the ubiquitous presence of pornography has created a generation that's arguably worse at sex than any before it. Why? Because pornography is the ultimate act of disembodiment. Real sex, the icon, is messy. It involves awkward angles, insecurities, communication, and the terrifying reality of being seen by another human being. It requires patience and presence. Pornography removes all of that. It's the ultimate capitalist product. It offers infinite novelty with zero intimacy. It allows us to bypass the awkwardness of being human. But here's the cost. You can't love a real person if you have been catechized by pixels. If you train your brain to respond to hyper-stimulated, edited, performative sex, the real thing will inevitably feel disappointing. Real bodies have flaws. Real bodies get tired. Real bodies require you to care about the person inside them. Pornography trains us to resent the limitations of reality. It enchants us with a lie, leaving us bored by the truth. The solution to the plague of pornography isn't just more willpower. It's not just installing filtering software, though that can be wise. The solution is re-enchantment. We don't defeat the anti-icon by simply staring at the floor. We defeat it by gazing at the true icon. Repentance in this context isn't just about feeling bad for what we've done. It's about waking up from a coma. To reference C.S. Lewis again, it's realizing that we've been satisfied with mud pies in a slum because we can't imagine what is meant by the offer of a holiday at the sea. We can't talk about the idolatry of sex without addressing the most volatile flashpoint of the culture war, same-sex attraction. This is where the collision between the revolution and the gospel is most violent. The revolution says, your desires are your identity. To deny them is to kill yourself. The church has often responded with a version of the rules. Your desires are disgusting. Stop having them. Both responses are failures. To redeem this conversation, we must apply the theology of the icon to our brothers and sisters who experience same-sex attraction, and to how we love them. The fundamental error of the sexual revolution is the claim that our sexual appetites define who we are. It created the categories of gay and straight as ontological identities, as the most profound truth about a human being. But the gospel frees us from the crushing weight of self-definition. For the Christian, your identity isn't found in who you want to sleep with. It's found in who died for you. You're not your attractions. You're not your temptations. You're a child of God bought with a price. To the Christian experiencing same-sex attraction, this is good news. It means you don't have to organize your entire existence around a specific set of desires. It means your sexual orientation is a footnote in your biography, not the title on the cover. You're far more complex, far more glorious, and far more loved than your sexuality could ever account for. However, we must be honest about the cost. For those called to a traditional sexual ethic, obedience often means walking a road of celibacy. In a culture that worships sex as the source of life, celibacy looks like a death sentence. If flourishing equals sexual expression, then asking someone to be celibate is asking them to be less than human. This is why the world views the dominant Christian position as not just wrong, but hateful. But we've already established that sex isn't life. It's an icon, it's a signpost. And here's the beautiful, brutal truth. Marriage is an icon of the gospel, but so is singleness. As we argued in our essay, The Great Household, the celibate Christian isn't a failed adult. They're a living prophecy. By living a life of fulfillment, joy, and intimacy without sex, they're declaring to a sex-obsessed world that Christ is sufficient. They're proving that the signpost isn't the destination. In many ways, the faithful, celibate, same-sex attracted Christian is the most powerful witness we have against the idols of our age. But we can't simply demand celibacy and walk away. This is where the church has failed. We've told our gay brothers and sisters, you can't have that, but we haven't offered them. Here's what you get instead. We smashed the idol of their desires, but we left them in a vacuum. We told them to be single, but then we idolized the nuclear family and left them sitting alone in the waiting room of our congregations. If we're going to call people to say no to same-sex romance, we must invite them into the deep, thick, non-sexual intimacy of the great household of God. The human soul doesn't need sex to survive, it needs intimacy. It needs to know and be known. It needs touch, it needs family. If the church isn't functioning as a family where single people are not projects, but essential members of the household, sharing meals, holidays, and life, then our call to celibacy is cruel. But if we're the great household, then celibacy becomes a plausible, life-giving vocation. The answer to I'm gay isn't just no, you aren't. The answer is, you are a beloved son or daughter of the king. Your body is a temple. Your desires aren't your master. And you have a seat at this table that no one can take away. We've walked through the wreckage of the revolution and the ruins of the rules. We've looked at the broken shards of the icon, the anxiety of the hookup, the trauma of the purity shaming, the hollowness of pornography, and the identity crisis of our modern age. And after all of this, we're left with a simple, liberating truth. Sex is safe, but it's not God. To redeem sex, we must put it in its proper place. The revolution tried to put sex on the throne, making it the source of our identity. It crushed us. Purity culture tried to put sex in the dungeon, making it a source of fear. It shamed us. The gospel puts sex on the altar. It's a holy gift, a powerful fire, and a sacred signpost. When we finally see sex as an icon, we're free to enjoy it without worshiping it. We're free to abstain from it without feeling like we're dying. We're free to talk about it without blushing, and to protect it without shaming. We need a church that's not afraid of the body. We need people who know that their skin, their nerves, and their desires were crafted by a God who called them very good. We need marriages that model the self-giving love of Christ and singleness that models the all-sufficiency of Christ. Ultimately, all of our hunger, the ache in our chests for connection, the drive for intimacy, the longing to be naked and not ashamed, is a hunger for God. Every sexual desire you've ever felt is a misdirected echo of the only romance that will ever truly satisfy you. One day, the shadows will flee. The signpost will fade because we'll have arrived at the destination. We'll sit at the marriage supper of the Lamb, united with the lover of our souls. On that day, we'll not miss the appetizer of earthly sex, because we'll finally be feasting on the reality. Until then, let's honor the icon. Let's flee from the idols, and let's wait with hope for the wedding. Thank you for listening to The Faithful Citizen. We know this was a heavy and vulnerable conversation. For some of you, perhaps exhausted by the performance of modern dating, we hope this offered a rest from the pressure to make sex your identity. For others, specifically those carrying the old scars of purity culture and the lie of damaged goods, we hope this felt like a healing balm, a reminder that no history can place you outside the reach of redemption. That's what happens when we smash idols. It's messy, but it's necessary. We've had to tear down the revolution that put sex on the throne and the rules that threw it in the dungeon. But the goal isn't just to leave you in the ruins. It's to pick up the pieces and put the icon back together. It's to place this gift where it actually belongs, on the altar. The question we're left with is the most important one. How do we live this? It starts by looking through the window rather than worshiping it. It begins by realizing that every hunger we feel is just a signpost pointing us toward the marriage supper of the Lamb. So let's honor the icon, flee the idols, and wait with hope for the wedding. If this conversation was helpful to you, the best way to support our work is to leave a rating and review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. It helps others find this community. For the full detailed essay on this topic, The Broken Icon, and to join the community, please subscribe to our Substack. The link is in the show notes. This has been The Faithful Citizen, and we'll see you next time.